Hello, my name is Minda King, and welcome to my presentation on comparing and contrasting the three major learning theories. So, I always like to start out a presentation by defining some of the major terms. So, when we talk about learning theories, we're talking about theories that are used to describe how learning occurs. So, like the specifics. So, first up, these are the three major theories. They're not the only ones. There are many, many more, but they usually fall into these three categories. So, first up, we have behaviorism, which suggests that behavior of students is contingent on their environment and that these behaviors are learned from external factors and not internal factors. So, what it's really saying is that you're looking at behavior only. It does not matter what's going on in the student's mind. It's strictly everything else. So think about this like Skinner's Pavlov's dog. Um, I'll bring that back up in a few minutes. But with Pavlov's dogs in psychology, Skinner had trained these dogs to come to dinner based on a bell, an external factor. So this is kind of like reinforcement, which I mean, especially with elementary, a lot of people use different types of reinforcement, so candy and things like that. So the external factors needed for learning. Cognitivism looks at the students how the students process information internally, so instead of responding to external factors. So it doesn't matter what's going on outside of a student's mind. It's strictly like brain and behavior kind of not behavior but brain processes. So memory, um the specifics on learning, like when you're in psychology and you're looking at how how memory works short and long term, or how all of those kind of things factor into the process of learning. So that's how cognitivism kind of works, and I'll come back to like some examples of that when I'm actually showing you the chart. Constructivism, students create knowledge and meaning by interacting with the world around them. So it's kind of like project learning, or how what you already know. It's not about necessarily the creation of the new information. It's kind of like adding on to what you already knew. So how you've interacted with your environment previously. Um, and this one gets kind of interesting because I'll come back to it, but it does kind of draw on some other theories too. So constructivism isn't just its own theory. It draws on some others. So but we'll come back to that one. So contrasting. So each of these theories have their own version of what they're looking at. So that's my first column. So with behaviorism, as I said, you're looking at external factors only. So um how the teacher interacts with the student. So that would be an external factor. What does the teacher do to create learning? So those so down at the bottom, that last row gives you kind of like some examples of what you would see in learning. So you're talking about reinforcements and incentives. So candy, if you're like a little kid, your grade and motivation, that sort of way, and repeated actions. And as I said, like this draws specifically on so all of these, of course, start with psychology. But Skinner and Pavlov's dogs, that is the main thing about behaviorism. that you need to kind of keep in mind because as I said, it's behavior only. It does not matter what how the brain processes information or any of that sort of those sort of things. It's strictly only behavior. You're only looking at that. And so with Skinner, that was his thought processes. Like he could train these dogs to come to a bale by, you know, food and things like that. I mean, conditioning is part of behaviorism. Of course, conditioning kids would probably be a very interesting thing, but not a probably not the best idea. Um, then we come to cognitivism, which is internal factors only. So mental processes only like memory and learning. Um, when you start to think about um, cognitivism, this is kind of like behavior changes only happen because of thinking and processing information. So kids are only um acting right, doing what they're supposed to because they've processed the information that tells them, "Hey, I have to do this." Some of the psychologists, the very famous ones that cognitivism kind of is played into is Gestalt psychology and Piaget. And Piaget is sort of like the mainstream behind developmental psychology. So that comes into play a little bit too. But a lot of the examples of this are kind of like linking information. So how a student would link angles in geometry to like a real world problem involving, a flagpole, things like that, like discussions and problem solving, all of those sort of things fit into cognitivism. But realize that, behaviorism and cognitivism, they're two separates in this instance. And when I come back to talking about similarities, we'll kind of get to that. Um, constructivism is a whole different ballgame of these three. So you're looking at prior knowledge and experiences, so things that students kind of already know. So we're suggesting that kids have already kind of learned behavior at home or learned certain things of reading or speaking at home, and you're building on those experiences as they go through school. And so Piaget, when he's talking about developmental psychology and how children develop over time, that's how constructivism is thinking. It's the thought process that, you start out as a infant and you learn things as you go and you build on those things. So the important thing to remember here is that Piaget shows up in not just constructivism, but also in cognitivism, which we'll discuss in similarities. Um, some of the examples here are that you could see in a classroom are problem-based learning, research and creative projects, and group collaborations. So I liked the idea of think when I think about constructivism, I actually go to like the creative projects. Um, you're taking what you've already taught students and you're kind of giving them the space to connect the prior knowledge that they just learned in class or that they've learned over years to their own experiences in life by giving them kind of like the creativity and maybe even an open-ended project. So I love that idea, and I liked how some of my research kind of brought that up. So next up, so we've just talked about the differences. The similarities are interesting too. So, of course, obviously, all of these theories are looking to explain learning. That's just they're learning theories. So, some of the two of them, cognitivism and constructivism, connect a lot more than some of the than behavior is going to connect into this. So, cognitivism and constructivism have like connections through Piaget, as I've already mentioned, with developmental theory, developmental psychology, and they do kind of have a discussion of cognitive processes. Whereas um, cognitivism is strictly about like the actual mental process of learning. Constructivism is kind of saying that, I already know some stuff, but I'm adding on to it. And then cognitive cognitivism and constructivism kind of see learning as like an individual process. So it doesn't like the outside external factors, the teacher doesn't exactly matter as much as the students' thought processes and the students' ideas and how they think, if that makes sense. So, while these are the main three theories, there are other theories, and some of these other theories fall into the main theory. And it gets kind of interesting because when these three are together and you start adding in all these other theories, they start to pull more connections. And usually it seems like what's happened is these first three theories kind of started the ball rolling, and other psychologists came in later and started noticing that, hey, I can't just think about behavior, I have to think about cognitive functioning too. So they created their own theories. So, an example of this is social learning theory, which combines behaviorism and cognitivism by looking at like the external factors along with mental processes like motivation. So it is looking at specifically students' behavior and how they interact with like everything outside of them. So the teacher, the information that they're learning, and then it looks at the processes because they felt like motivation and the mental processes shouldn't be excluded in the discussion of learning. So, these are just some of the main similarities and differences. So, take a look at some of these theories. They get very interesting as you go along. Um, I hope you have enjoyed my presentation. Here are some of my references. Um, Please do your own research. It gets very interesting once you start looking into psychology. And I hope that you have enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.